All right, American Defiance, number 4. Like the left-right thing, this one's going to be on a general theme and connected sort of to my own philosophical orientation. It's sunset out here in New York Springs on the solstice. Probably get a little pop off the wind and stuff in the mic. I apologize for that. Let's talk about American individualism, okay? I would say that all the figures collected in this book, um, the greatest American radicals from the 17th through the 19th century, are individualists of one kind or another. Uh, there are a couple possible exceptions, John Woolman and Frederick Douglass. Even there, I think you're safe calling them individualists. Um, Now, I'd say that really has made many leftists profoundly uncomfortable with this history um, because they define themselves as collectivists. And I've heard, and yet they're puzzled probably by, or they admire many aspects of the political positions of these figures. I mean, the feminist positions, the abolitionist positions, um, pacifism, perhaps. Um, I guess I've been in philosophy meetings, Hello Society for the Advancement of American Philosophy, where people were really, I think, reading Emerson, for example, quite against himself, trying to work him into a socialist framework or something like that. Ain't gonna work. Um, I mean, I'd say the two greatest statements of American individualism are Emerson's self-reliance, which I describe in the little intro um, as my favorite piece of writing ever, and Thoreau's civil disobedience. They're both collected in here. If you haven't read them, go read them. I'm not going to quote them, but they're very familiar. They're the most celebrated writings in the book. Um, Now, the thing is, the individualism of these figures emerges, I think, from radical Protestantism. All right. I mean, an extreme version of a similar kind of individualism is the philosophy of Soren Kierkegaard. Merging out of a Lutheran theology into something very much more intense, uh, perhaps, and the legacy of the Protestant Reformation. Um, but let me, say first of all that these are by and large also anti-capitalist, not uniformly. Lysander Spooner is in here, and he's been something of a hero to even Ayn Randish libertarian types. Um, Although I think there's some tension there, and he's not an unbridled fan of industrial capitalism or something like that. And individualism tends to mean just self-seeking, according to the modern left. But that's not what it means at all to these people. Um, when I start describing myself as an individualist, and I do describe myself as an individualist, um, I find that my friends and colleagues, when I was teaching in academia, the sentence will emerge from them eventually, but what about the collective? And I suppose that sentence is an illustration of collectivism itself, because many people produce it right at the same moment in the discussion. Well, what about the collective? Now, let me say that in my view, and I think in the view of most of the figures in this book, um, people can reach collective decisions together. There can be a consensus in a group. Um, People can act in concert. Um, but if you're deciding what is fundamentally real, the individual or the collective, I think you're confused. I mean, they're both fundamentally real in some way. Um, Now, one important feature of almost all of these figures, one thing they centralize, is that though it's possible to enter into collective decision making, uh, you know, democratically, hopefully, let's say, um, it's always possible to dissent from a consensus, any consensus, okay? And it's been an extraordinarily valuable thing, an important thing, that people have dissented from virtually every consensus, all right? Now, who's doing that? Well, it might be a little sub-collective, I suppose. You know what? It might be a courageous individual, like many of the people collected in this book. And that's important, and that's what Thoreau is on about. That's what Emerson is on about. And I have to say that I find often that when people say, "What about the collective?" they mean they're legitimizing coercion, right? They're about to start justifying the use of force to, constrain people to act as they think they ought to act, or as a supposed consensus of their people think they ought to act. I'm willing to take any collective seriously if it's not produced by coercion, and I'm also willing to say that, and I mean the state, for instance, or through social sanctions, informal social sanctions, like you disagree with us, so you can't be in this group or whatever, or we're going to, more or less ostracize you until you produce the approved form of words or something like that. Okay, so more power to you, collective, but the only way to have a genuine collective is voluntarily. Everything else is a simulated collective. In fact, it's not even possible to tell whether it's unanimous or not because it's produced under coercion. All right? And so I think usually when the left starts saying, "What about the collective?" they really mean, like, we will enforce our will upon your body. That's not an inspiring vision. That's a disgusting vision. All right? Now, as is typical of this whole discourse too, I'd say that the sort of individualism that you get in Josiah Warren, for instance, in Nathaniel Peabody Rogers, stated in a beautiful and very deeply radical way, emerges in part from anti-slavery. All right, so both Rogers and Josiah Warren, and I often called the first American anarchist, and I would say also Emerson and Thoreau, basically talk in terms of self-sovereignty. That is, the ownership of each person by themselves. Okay, now that sounds sort of capitalistic in terms of, because it defines in terms of maybe a property relationship you have to yourself, which is very puzzling, I suppose. They mean fundamentally each person is in charge of themselves. Right? Each person is a center of will, and to violate that fact is a violation of humanity. Right? I think the reason that they often do formulate the thing in terms of self-ownership is to contrast with slavery, which is an assertion of ownership by one person over another. And all these figures, Garrison, Rogers, these are radical abolitionists, the Grimke's, regard that as the greatest sin possible, all right, a claim of ownership in persons. So one way to frame the idea that no person can own another is that each person is the owner of themselves, right? And I think that's a fundamentally decent insight. Now, it leads to a series of positions that many leftists could approve, actually. First of all, it's a basically egalitarian position. This is the position of the feminists in this book, for example. Like, the claim of a husband over a wife is an ownership claim. But women are self-sovereign. Maybe created in the image of God, and their self-ownership is being violated. Right? Each person is equally the owner of themselves, without regard to race, without regard to gender, sometimes even without regard to age. Sometimes some of these figures extend this even to animals or some animals. Nathaniel Peabody Rogers is, again, an example of that. So you can get a very clear kind of feminism and a very compelling kind of feminism and an overall egalitarianism and anti-racism, egalitarianism as a whole of a certain sort out of this sort of individualism, and all these figures did. Now, secondly, with regard to many of these figures, I would accept Spooner here. Though individual distinctness from other human beings is important, human beings are also conceived as fundamentally relational. This sounds paradoxical, but I don't think it is. So people are in relation to one another in a profound way, in a kind of interpenetrating way, like we're not fully distinct from one another. And importantly, especially in the transcendental tendency in Rogers, Thoreau, Emerson, we're not distinct from nature and or the objects around us and the things around us, not fully. And now, one way I characterize this, and this will be in my forthcoming book, Entanglements, A System of Philosophy, is that each person is unique, is constituted from their relations to other things, and is unique in virtue of having unique relations, a unique set of relations. So right now I'm in a certain direction from this tree behind me, right? Like, well, I'm the only person, indeed the only thing, that is in just this exact spatial relationship with that tree and this computer, right? And the house and the sky and etc. Right? I am unique. I'm the only person with my mother and my children. Well, at least all of them. Of course, they have mothers. I'm the only person that has the human relations that I have, the whole bundle of human relations that I have, that is related to the same people that I'm the only one that's related to the people I'm related to in the way that I'm related to them. Infinitely related to them, okay? In an infinitely complex set of relations. So each thing, and Josiah Warren, for example, makes this the basis of a metaphysics. Each thing is unique in virtue of its constitutive relations with other people and other things. Right? And this uniqueness is of extraordinary value. It's holy in a way. It's like the infinite value of a soul. That's a profound and interesting position, I think. And really, you find it very intensely in Emerson and Thoreau. So I think that now one thing to notice about that is that for these thinkers, I mean, for the transcendentalists in particular, our relations to other people are real and central to our lives, but so are relations to animals, so are relations to inanimate objects, and so on. We're in a universe, and we are a locus or zone in that universe, complexly or infinitely related to each other thing in that universe. And there's nothing especially uniquely real about human beings or uniquely constitutive of human beings in human beings. That is, our relationship to trees is just as real as our relationship to human beings. And we're in collectivities that are much wider than human collectivities. So I think, that's how individualism works through these texts. And again, like many sensible, coherent ideas, it's incompatible with anything on the left-right spectrum. It's definitely not right-wing individualism as we understand it now. And, it's definitely not left-wing collectivism. And so that no one really understands the politics of these figures when they look at it through that lens. And I wish they had other lenses, but it seemed, as I said, the left-right spectrum seems to be a chronic disease that is destroying the human brain. All right. Have a good solstice or whatever day you may be watching this. Take it easy.